flourishing, a lot of other industries began to emerge in America. Okay, not just textiles. Where you could consider Eli Whitney and his cotton gin, and then Samuel Slater building a textile factory. There were other efforts made in the industrial world by Americans, and one of the principles that was put forth in this time period is the idea of interchangeable parts. You guys know what interchangeable parts are? We kind of take it for granted. Like, I have a pair of scissors here, and it has a screw in it right here, and I can take these scissors apart in two pieces, right? I can go get another pair of scissors made by the same company and take half of those and put them and screw them together with this pair of scissors, and it would work just fine. They're interchangeable, okay? Now, before that, the principle of interchangeable parts was thought up and really put into action. Every factory machine was made independent of itself. So, like, a blacksmith would custom make every part to fit every machine differently. So you couldn't take a part from one machine and put it on another machine and it would work, okay? But after standardization and assembly lines and mass production, and the principle of interchangeable parts becomes widely adopted, you could do that. You can take parts from one machine and put it on another, or for anything. So one of the first machines was that utilized this principle was invented by a man named Elias Howe, and then perfected by another man, and I'm not going to tell you his name yet. You know what the machine is? Machine invented by Elias Howe in 1846. The sewing machine. Elias Howe doesn't get much credit because the guy who perfected the sewing machine, his name was Isaac Singer. Everybody in this room has probably seen or heard of a Singer sewing machine. Okay, so that gave another strong boost to northern industrialization. Why is a sewing machine important? It does sew stuff. That's brilliant. What else?
Cotton makes clothes and
Yeah.
slavery.
Yeah. All right. So there's a lot more cotton. A lot more. Also brilliant. No, I appreciate you guys for responding. The sewing machine becomes the foundation of the ready-made clothing industry. In 1820, ladies, if you wanted a new dress, how'd you get it? You made it. Took an afternoon and made a dress, right?
No.
Probably took a month
Yes.
and made a dress, right? Very tedious labor, all right? But once cotton becomes in great abundance, it makes it cheap. You can get your fabric very cheaply, and you can run it through a sewing machine and make that dress in a couple hours, I'm assuming, okay? At least of the day, all right? So, and it was all cheaper, much, much cheaper. And these new technologies really change American culture. And it's not a change that I can just tell you in one sentence. It's a change that you're going to see up through present day, all right? Because women, their lives change forever in a lot of different ways. Women go from having a cottage industry where they're making the clothes for their family at home toward working in a factory and operating a sewing machine like a human robot. They're just cranking out fabric all day long in a crowded, cluttered, clattering factory. Okay? Very alliterative. All right, next guy. Who's this guy?
Guessing has something to do with telegraph.
It's a good guess. You're a good reader.
Morse code.
Yeah, Morse code. Now, Morse code, it can be done through a variety of ways, but the one that was most influential was done through this machine, which was invented by Samuel Morse. Samuel Morse. And that machine is called the telegraph. You guys know what a telegraph is? What is it?
The text, but not a text.
That's perfect. It is an 1800s text message machine. It sends text messages, but it does it in code.
Yeah, it's very,
So you don't like get a piece of paper printed out in an English message. It sends an electrical signal through wires in a series of beeps and dashes, beeps and boops. So it's like beep 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 beep, and each pause means in between each of the beeps and boops means something. You can actually learn Morse code. That's it. Once you,
like a fax machine.
it would not be like a fax machine because it doesn't print. It comes through as an electrical signal which you would listen to, or you could see it. It could light up like a little bulb, and then the person would have to interpret it live as it was coming in. So telegraph offices popped up all over the United States, and people learned this new code. So, the first ever telegraph wires ran from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore, Maryland, and it made Samuel Morse a very wealthy man. Now you could literally communicate with someone at the speed of light who was not right beside you. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. Okay? All right. So Samuel Morse telegraph. There's Morse code. Okay. Last little bit we'll do today. Now we got all these new factories popping up, and we've got large populations of immigrants who are starving for labor, and the conditions are just right for corruption and for people to be oppressed. And you begin to see some pretty serious problems beginning to emerge with labor in the United States. There was an increasingly growing labor problem. Before the factories were built, manufacturing had all been done at home or in a small shop. A small shop with a master craftsman and maybe his journeyman apprentice making stuff. Usually the master craftsman and the people that worked for him had a pretty close, intimate relationship. They're standing at the same workbench working on the same, stuff. Whereas now the owner of a factory, they're not rubbing elbows with the laborers. They're not on the assembly line doing the work. They probably don't even go in the factory, okay? So clearly the factory system did not benefit everyone equally. Labor was taken advantage of as frequently as possible. Hours were long, wages were low, meals were skimpy and often have to be gulped down because not given appropriate time to eat them. The buildings they worked in were unsanitary. They might have electricity, they might have whirring machines, but some of these factories did not have indoor plumbing. Very unsanitary. Poorly ventilated. Imagine working in a textile mill with all that fiber just flying around and no ventilation. You're just breathing in all that fiber that's in the air all day, every day, 12 hours a day in a hot, stuffy factory. Okay? Poorly lit. It was expensive to light because before the light bulb was invented, how did you light your factory? Candles, well oil lamps. Yeah. So they're not lit very well. And you're not permitted to form a union to fight for your own rights. Especially vulnerable were children. Bring in the kids. Bring your kids to work day every day. And employers loved to employ children. Why? What is it? Okay. All right. That's one reason they have tiny little hands and they can fit their hands back into these whirring machines easier.
Ooh, didn't they get their hands ripped off?
Sometimes. Look at this kid standing at he only has shoes on. This is like an industrial factory floor. He's not even wearing shoes. Okay? Like you can't even walk into a factory that doesn't do any kind of production halfway near this intense without like a hard hat and safety glasses and steel-toed boots on now because there's regulations. This kid's like 7 years old, shoeless, and he's got like long sleeves on. He could get his sleeve caught in that machine and have his arm ripped clean off. So very few regulations, all right? That's one reason, because the kids had tiny little fingers and they could manipulate and fit in the machines better, or even crawl into the machine to make repairs. Another reason is they're cheap. You could pay a kid a tenth what you pay a kid's dad.
They'd be happy with it.
Huh?
They'd be happy with it.
Yeah.
Were there like schools?
Well, who needs school when you're starving?
Yeah.
You know. So, children were very vulnerable to exploitation, and a significant portion of our nation's laborers were under the age of 10. 10. Now, I want you, it's hard for us to imagine having lived, nice, cozy lives. We weren't even allowed to work. You guys what are you, 15?
Yeah.
You're not really allowed to have a job yet, right? When can you get a job? 16?
Yeah.
14.
Sometimes I think the government will make exceptions for you if you can prove a hardship. But for the most part, you don't work until you're 16. Now, imagine already having been being 16 and already had a job for 10 years. Hello. Yes. All righty. Laura, you're just signing up here. Now, imagine being 7 years old and spending 12 hours a day in a stuffy, overcrowded, unsanitary factory, breathing in horrible things. How do you think you would deal with that? All right, let me add this to it. You don't get to see your parents when you're at work. You are sent to a special place, like where you have your own job to do. Sometimes it might just be like operating a machine that you just push a button or something, or sweeping the floor or cleaning up. That might be your job. And if you don't do it well enough or fast enough, there are people there that are watching you and will take you to a special room in the factory called a whipping room.
Oh my God.
And they will beat you until you start to do better. And that will occur every time that you are not working hard enough. So you're emotionally starved, your nutrition is poor, you're physically stunted, you are brutally whipped, and you are forced to do this 12 hours a day ever since you're 7 years old. These kids are going to grow up to be really well-adjusted Americans, right? No, they're not, okay? So this becomes a problem, all right? And hence why we have laws on child labor today, okay? Now, there's probably not a factory in America as bad as one of the nicer factories in 1840 because we have labor laws now. But eventually, laborers in this time period get fed up. They get sick of being treated this way. And so what is the main recourse that labor has against ownership? Unionizing, and that union is usually going to advocate for what? What can the laborers do to get?
They strike.
They go on strike. Okay? They go on strike. So dozens and dozens of strikes erupted in the 1830s and 40s. The majority of strikes were over higher wages. People wanted to get paid more. Some were striking to work a 10-hour day instead of 12. Some people went on strike because they wanted to smoke on the job. There were literally strikes where people were like, we just want to we want to smoke while we're working. And yeah, a textile factory is probably not the best idea. So, but do you think the majority of these strikes were successful or unsuccessful? Unsuccessful. Historically, guys, in America, labor, whenever strikes happen, historically they are unsuccessful. What do you think makes these early strikes unsuccessful? Well, first of all, what is a strike? What does labor do? What do they like? What is the action that labor takes? They don't work. They just say, "Hey, everybody in this factory, we are not going to work." And what happens to the factory? In theory, it shuts down, and when it shuts down, it's not making a product, and then what's happening to the business owner? He's losing money. Okay. Well, in the 1840s, what is there a surplus of in America?
Workers.
Poor people who are dying of starvation in American cities. So a lot of these people, whenever a strike would occur, they would just be like, you don't want to work for 5 cents? I got 100 people outside willing to work for a penny an hour. Goodbye. Go ahead and strike. I got people that'll come and take your job, and then if they quit, I got somebody to take their job. There is ample labor. And so therefore strikes were largely unsuccessful because what happened when the workers stop working, what does the company owner do?
Bring in more.
Just bring in more people to cross the picket line. And a person who crosses the picket line is called a scab. I don't usually give my opinion. I'm not a big scab person. Okay? Have you guys ever heard of a guy named Jack London? He wrote a book called Call of the Wild. You ever heard of the book? All right. Jack London he wrote this about scabs. The Scab by Jack London. After God had finished the rattlesnake, the toad, and the vampire, he had some awful stuff left with which he made a scab. A scab is a 2-legged animal with a corkscrew soul, a waterlogged brain, and a combination backbone made of jelly and glue. Where others have hearts, he carries a tumor of rotten principles. Judas Iscariot was a gentleman compared to a scab. For betraying his master, he had the character to hang himself. The scab hasn't. There is nothing lower than a scab. Why do you think Jack London... Yeah, why such harsh language about the scab? Well, just look at it like, let's say... this would never happen because nobody wants my job. But let's say the teachers go on strike again, okay? And that means like a real strike, not like what we've been doing. I mean a real one. Like we're not getting paid, like real strike, okay? And so all the teachers, we go outside and we wait outside the building. And all the kids are coming in. And anybody that any substitutes that try to come in, we prevent them from coming in. Because we don't want school to happen. We want school to be canceled and all the kids have to go home and inconvenience everybody. All right? Well, I mean, that's how we're going to get what we want. So, but so those scabs, whenever they would cross the picket line and go in and work, they're helping the business owner. All the while, the scab's getting paid a penny an hour. So you're betraying your own people. Like you're betraying your own labor. Like because you are working, you are helping the businessman. See like the picture, he's licking the bottom of the business owner's shoe. Because he's helping the business owner by crossing the picket line. Okay? My dad worked in the mines in the 1970s, and he worked for U.S. Steel, which was a union mine, and they went on strike all the time. And there was some violence going down in some of these mines. Like people would go into work when there was a strike going on, and they'd come out and their car wouldn't start because their gas tank would be full of sugar and stuff like that. Okay, I've heard.
Principals have to cross picket lines?
Yeah, but they're not labor; they're the man.
Yeah.
They're
I didn't.
they're administration, so they don't count. All right, so question, like you guys got this? All right, so next time we'll look at a mill that opens that was largely operated by women, and we'll see how it worked out for them. So go ahead and work on your outlines for the next 20 minutes or so.